Hey guys, and welcome back to Oversky Deck Doctor. This week we're going to take a look at the much loved and the much hated Yellow Rush. This is Sagittarius Yellow Rush. This is a list that I've developed myself in response to all the red control that showed up on ladder. This deck is all based around haste creatures. That might sound a bit odd because that's Yellow Rush in a nutshell. But this one goes even further by adding Flash Salmons and Kalim's followers to make sure we have a maximum amount of haste creatures to hit the orb, using the Orodrim Sagittarius to gain additional Faeria to get extra hits on the orb, and then develop these massive Zealous Crusaders to overwhelm your opponent. And why this is so good against red control is because red control doesn't run Crystal Flower, so you are able to get away with these big Zealous Crusaders, and it's going to be very difficult for the red control players to deal with. Now, if you are familiar with Yellow Rush, it plays very similar to the old style of builds, but you do develop your lands a little bit differently. You want to have a desert in front of your orb for that Sagittarius, and like I said, you're primarily focusing on developing these big Zealous Crusaders. So let's get into the deck list and see what the cards do. So these are the core haste creatures of the deck. Kalim's Follower is only a 2-of. I had to make room for another Choking Sands because I was playing against a couple of mono green decks while I was climbing. You know, Living Willows are really sad when it comes to playing Yellow Rush, so I added an additional Choking Sands and took out a Kalim's Follower. But Follower hits the orb, powers up the Zealous Crusader, activates Prayer, and can be sacrificed by a Demon Wrangler. Flash Salmon is probably just a better version of Follower these days. Fly-in haste charge 2. It allows you to hit the orb from range. There are some cheeky little setups you can do with your land where you can go like Desert, Explore Desert, play Sagittarius or not, and then play the Flash Salmon and then hit face with the charge 2 to activate the prayers. And this is quite a good tactic against red control because you are generating power for your Zealous Crusaders very early on, since it's part of the main win condition of this build. But Flash Salmons, don't be afraid to use them as like a cycle. Hit the orb, let them die, draw an extra card, and don't be afraid to sacrifice them with Demon Wrangler either, developing that 5/2. That can apply a lot of pressure. Now, Orodrim Monk is the more premium haste creature of the build. It has haste, it's a 2/1. It draws a card whenever it hits your opponent's orb. So this one you don't really want to sack with Demon Wrangler as much, unless you really need the pressure and the damage. Like I said, it's more of a premium haste creature because of its ability to draw cards, and you want to cycle as quickly as possible because you want to get to those Zealous Crusaders and you want to be able to play them. So Orodrim Monk, probably the best haste creature out of all three, and this is one you don't want to sack with Demon Wrangler as much, whereas the Follower and the Salmon, be sure to sack them whenever you can. Speaking of Demon Wrangler, here he is. Like I said, sacking those haste creatures is going to apply a lot of pressure. This is a great card in the early game as well. Being able to hit the orb with, say, a Flash Salmon or a Follower, and then sack it into a 5/2 can be very powerful against certain decks. And Demon Wrangler is interesting because in the older builds of Yellow Rush, they never used Demon Wrangler, but it was more like a green-yellow sacrifice card. But in recent times, Demon Wrangler has been making a lot of waves in the archetype, and it has become a staple now. I believe this card is just so good for Yellow Rush that you basically just want 3 of them. Shaitan Demon, another staple of Yellow Rush, 3 Faeria for a 5/4. Absolutely incredible. You know, this is a very powerful creature, and what's great about Demon is it challenges stuff like Underground Boss. Underground Boss, which I talked about in a recent card spotlight, is a very powerful card. Not a lot of cards can challenge it at this cost range, and Shaitan Demon is absolutely perfect. Clears it cleanly if it doesn't have a Gift of Steel, and it lives to tell the tale unless it gets Ground Shakers or Cypher's Wrath, but that's additional resources from your opponent being spent to deal with the Shaitan Demon. So fantastic rush card, fantastic tempo card as well, and you're going to want to see this in the early game to apply some pressure. Like other Yellow Rush builds, this has access to a lot of removal. Soul Drain is a way to sustain your life or just take care of threats. And when you're applying pressure and hitting that orb, the sustain from the Drain 2 life can be very good with the Shaitan Demon, just making sure you don't take too much damage and keeping that demon's production ability in check. Wind Soldier is a great card to hit the orb, and sack with Demon Wrangler, but also a very good removal tool that can collect Faeria in its travel. So this has like two uses. One, hit the orb, maybe play a prayer and sacrifice it with a Demon Wrangler, or clear a creature that's either blocking you or collecting Faeria. So a very versatile card and can be useful in a lot of situations. Choking Sands, I was running one of originally, but I bumped it up to 2 because, like I said, once you bump into mono green with all the willows, the wood elementals, it can be very hard for a very haste build of Yellow Rush to get that orb damage in and get those orb hits for the Zealous Crusader. So I had to bump it up to another Choking Sands, dropping a Kaleem's Follower, but Choking Sands has a lot of great targets in the game anyway. Water elementals, wood elementals, willows, underground bosses, brigands, to name a few. So Choking Sands, a very strong card in Faeria at the moment, and that's why I'm not using Last Nightmare. Last Nightmare is very expensive, whereas Choking Sands takes care of the creatures that really bother this deck. Alright, let's take a look at the synergistic cards. Kaleem's Prayer synergizes with every card in the deck that can hit the orb. You're going to gain additional Faeria, you're going to draw additional cards and cycle, and you're going to get closer to those Zealous Crusaders. Orodrim Sagittarius, this card hasn't been in competitive play at all recently. It was very popular in old Yellow Tempo decks and old Yellow Rush decks as well. And I love this card. I think it's really good, especially in a deck that uses haste creatures, because you're going to gain that additional Faeria straight away. You want to play this card either in combination with haste creatures, so you gain immediate value, or you want to set it up in the early game, start sniping your opponent from afar, activating Kaleem's Prayer from a distance, which is very powerful, and of course empowering those Zealous Crusaders. Now, speaking of Zealous Crusader, this card was kind of a one-off for quite a while in Yellow Rush, but now there's so much red on the ladder that aren't using crystal flowers, Zealous Crusader becomes a lot stronger. And when you build an entire deck around hitting the orb, I know that sounds a bit odd, it is Yellow Rush, but there are a lot more haste creatures, and you know, you have the ranged Sagittarius as well, chipping away. Empowering these Zealous Crusaders is very important for beating those matchups. You know, dropping an 8/8 or a 9/9 Zealous Crusader is quite common in this deck, and it can be very difficult for red control to deal with, especially when there's 3 of them in the list. So this is your finisher. This is a card that's going to win the matches for you in the late game, and it can be incredibly oppressive against certain archetypes. So prioritize hitting the orb, building up that Zealous Crusader, and then dropping the big one, and hopefully your opponent can't answer it. Now that we've discussed all the cards in the deck, let's talk about the Mulligan. There are quite a few different options and lines you can take with this list. I think the ones that, you know, the more straightforward Mulligan is pick up a haste creature, pick up a Demon Wrangler. So you just build towards your opponent, you hit their orb when you first get that first desert down close to their orb, and then just sack it with the Demon Wrangler for pressure. So Follower, Salmon are very good for this, and then Demon Wrangler, of course, to get that 5/2 Demon Wing out. Now, other options, Sagittarius is really good as well. You get that additional Faeria, you set up an Archer early that can start chipping away at your opponent, and if you pick up a Sagittarius and a Flash Salmon, you could even go for Kaleem's Prayer and keep that, so that is another option. Shaitan Demon is really good as well, you know, just a really strong, cheap creature you can play in the early game to apply pressure. It's a 5/4, can clear a lot of threats, and of course your opponent's going to have to answer it. Choking Sands is also another good keep if you are afraid of taunt. If you think your opponent's playing a taunt based deck, maybe mono green, maybe you played them in a previous game, you can keep the Choking Sands and have answers to those early living willows or wood elementals to make sure you get that damage in with your haste creatures. When it comes to the cost of Yellow Rush, it's very, very cheap. One of the great things about the deck as well. So if you're starting out in Faeria and you're a bit of an aggro player anyway, Yellow Rush is not only really fun, but it's also very cheap to build. You're going to only need 575 Memoria to pick up the core of the build, and then you only need the 1 Oversky Island in order to get the Flash Salmon. That is the only card from Oversky that features in this list. As you can see, no legendaries, 4 epics, a lot of commons and rares. So it's very cheap to build Yellow Rush. Like I said, if you're a new player, you like aggro, you're going to absolutely love this deck, and you're going to be able to craft it without spending a lot of Memoria, and then you can save your Memoria to focus on more expensive decks. Alright, let's go over the strengths and weaknesses. Fast and furious gameplay. You are going to hit your opponent a lot in the early game and apply a lot of pressure, and your opponent's going to be scrambling to defend. So if you like having the initiative, if you like being the one who's playing proactive, Yellow Rush is definitely a deck for you. Massive Zealous Crusaders. You have 3 of them in this list, so if you hit up their orb a lot during the match, your first Zealous Crusader is going to be pretty big, and then if you continue to hit their orb, your other Zealous Crusaders are going to grow as well. So the big Zealous Crusaders are very useful in this metagame, especially with all the red control going around. Lots of card draw between Prayer, Monk, and Flash Salmon. You cycle so fast in this deck. Monks, every time they hit, they draw a card, so if they don't get answered after their first hit, you're going to get another card draw. You get to use Prayer. Once you've set up your lands as well, you can start drawing off the power wheel, and when Flash Salmon dies, it also gives you additional card draw. So being able to dig through your deck, find answers, find more haste creatures, get to those Zealous Crusaders is very important, and this deck does it very well. As for weaknesses, this deck really struggles against taunts. I've been playing against Alvar and Ladder. He's gone back to mono green, and Alvar, you know, is known as a known mono green player. He had a lot of success with it before the Oversky. And Willows, Wood Elementals, Grove Guardians can be a massive pain. So if there are a lot of mono green decks in your region of the ladder, it might be worth adding maybe a Last Nightmare as well, just to deal with the Grove Guardians, but the Choking Sands will answer the Living Willow and the Wood Elemental. So taunts, very big problem for this list, because you're just so focused on hitting the orb as much as possible to build up to those Zealous Crusaders. One taunt can completely lock you down if you don't pick up either Choking Sands or maybe a Shaitan Demon to be able to deal with that taunt. Now, the strongest creature is Shaitan Demon until Zealous Crusaders have all grown up. So your creatures are quite weak when it comes to creature combat. It's going to be quite difficult for you to challenge big creatures like Ground Shakers and Grove Guardians. You're going to rely on combinations of removal, maybe 2 Wind Soldiers, maybe a Wind Soldier or a Soldier and a hit from a Flash Salmon. But the Shaitan Demon is pretty good when it comes to challenging these creatures and makes you use less resources. But that is really the only kind of card that can do that. The Demon Wing from the Demon Wrangler, although it has 5 attack, it has 2 life, which means it gets answered by popular removal like Cypher's Wrath, Soul Drain, Wind Soldier, Deepwood Stalker. There are a lot of cards that can clear that quite easily. So that can be quite a problem if your opponent kind of bulks up on creatures and starts blocking you from hitting the orb. It can cost a lot of resources to take care of them. So yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind. So Shaitan Demon is a very good card to have in the early game, just because it allows you to bully these bigger creatures off board in combination with removal and give you a path to hit the orb with your haste creatures. Land placement is pretty straightforward. You want to start with a desert in front of your orb. This is for Sagittarius. This allows you to use the ranged ability to apply pressure and shoot from afar. And it gives you a good safe place to put Sagittarius there without being attacked by creatures. So it does demand kind of global removal like Flame Burst and other removal cards in order to take care of it. Now, one thing about the desert in front of your orb is a little bit of a mind game as well. Yellow Rush traditionally just double neutral straight up, or explores, and then starts building deserts. But when you build a desert in front of your orb, your opponent might think you're a different yellow deck. So your opponent can't get a read immediately on what archetype your build is. So this is very cool, because your opponent might start building lands in front of their orb, which is very good for you. So it's a great little mind game to start things off, especially if your opponent can't get that read. Now, after the desert, you can develop double neutrals to start getting up towards your opponent, and then you can go desert if you want to play, say, an early demon, or you could go explore desert and start hitting with a creature, haste creature, start applying pressure. Another thing to consider as well, you want to find an aggressive land that can hit your opponent's orb. And as you can see here, there are 4 deserts here, which are pretty good for you. If you can get on the well, that's fine, but you don't really need to. Your creatures are quite cheap anyway. So if you can get 1 or 2 of these deserts in a spot, you kind of have all your lands built because it'll give you enough avenues to attack your opponent's orb. Now, if you're going up against red control and you have the flash salmons in hand, you can go for a different style of build. And this is mainly with the explore, so this is quite a situational land setup. You can go desert, explore, desert, and then start summoning flash salmons from that desert and hitting the orb. Now, you get to cycle with these flash salmons, you get to build up your Zealous Crusaders early on, so that's the reason that you would do that against that specific archetype. But of course, you're going to have played your opponent in a previous game to know that they are playing red control, so only use this if you're pretty certain that it's going to be red control. It's quite a specific land setup for that build, and you need flash salmon, so that's another thing to consider. But yeah, land placement, pretty straightforward. Desert in the front, double neutral, explore, or just double neutral, into a desert, start applying pressure, hitting that orb, build up those Zealous Crusaders, and win the game. That wraps up this episode of Deck Doctor. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I know Yellow Rush has been around for a long time, but I feel this build is unique and different enough that it might interest you guys, especially if you enjoy hitting the orb, and especially if you enjoy dropping massive Zealous Crusaders. This deck has been very successful for me so far on ladder, so I hope you guys have the same success as I have. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, drop a thumbs up. If you haven't already, drop a subscribe to keep up to date of when our content goes live. We have the monthly cup this weekend, so we'll have VODs for that coming up on the following week, so check them out if you want to see some competitive Faeria and get an idea of where the meta game is going, because the monthly cup usually has a huge influence on the meta game itself. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoy Yellow Rush, and I hope you enjoy smoking.